Hey guys, in today's video I bring you a powerful and transformative story. Let's meet Larkin Prescott, a retired teacher who had a near-death experience that changed everything. She met the angel Gabriel, received visions of the future and an urgent message about Jesus' return. What she saw will leave you goosebumps and full of reflections. Before we start, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to receive all notifications. Get ready for this exciting story that will move you. My name is Larkin Prescott, and you might think my life would be unremarkable. A retired literature teacher with a passion for books, words, and stories. I lived a quiet life in the small coastal town of Blue Haven, Maine. I'm not one for exaggerations, and I certainly never thought I'd be here, telling you what I'm going to share now. It was an October night in 2023. I had just watched my grandchildren's school play. Ethan, my oldest grandson, played a fearless knight, and Emma, his youngest sister, was a reluctant princess. It was adorable and funny, with little mistakes that only made it more endearing. I left the school auditorium feeling filled with a love so deep it almost hurt. As I drove down the deserted road home, the stars shone brightly above the pine tree tops. The smell of salt coming from the nearby ocean was familiar and comforting. I felt at peace, reliving the happy moments of the night. Suddenly, I felt a pang in my chest. At first, I thought it was something temporary, perhaps a reflection of the dinner we ate after the play, but the pain increased, becoming overwhelming. My left arm began to tingle and weakness took over me. It can't be, I whispered to myself, fighting to keep control of the steering wheel. The car started to rock on the road, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't focus. The pain was so strong that my thoughts became confused. In a last-ditch effort, I tried to pull the car over, but everything went dark before I could. My last conscious thought was a desperate prayer. God, help me. When I woke up, or, at least, when I realized I was still conscious, everything had changed. I was no longer in the car, but somewhere above it. I looked down and saw my body. It was like watching a scene from a movie. But what surprised me most was the absence of fear or despair. I felt free. There began the journey that would transform my life. What happened next is something I will never be able to forget, no matter how hard I try to find the words to describe it. When I realized I was looking at my own body trapped in the car, everything in me became surprisingly calm. I felt no pain, no fear, nor any anguish. There was just an indescribable lightness. It was as if I had taken off a heavy coat that I had worn all my life without realizing it. The car was leaning down the embankment, partially trapped by bushes and rocks. My body was still, head lolled to the side, as the distant sound of a horn echoed across the deserted road. For a moment, I observed that scene as if I were a spectator, no longer the protagonist of that tragedy. That's weird, I thought, although the idea of being outside my body didn't terrify me. On the contrary, there was a peace I had never felt before, as if I finally understood something that couldn't be explained in words. Suddenly, I was enveloped by a light. It wasn't like sunlight or light from a lamp. It was alive, pulsating, full of colors I had never seen before. It seemed to call out to me, and without even needing to move my body or whatever I was in at that moment, I was drawn to it. The feeling of crossing into that space was like diving into a warm and welcoming ocean. There was a bright glow around me, but nothing hurt my eyes. The air, if you could call it air, was pure, and I felt completely renewed. It was as if all the pain, hurt, and weight in my life had disappeared in an instant. It was then that I heard my name. Larkin. The voice was deep, full of authority but also of love. It was as if each syllable was filled with purpose, and as I heard it, I felt known on a level I never before imagined possible. I looked around and, in the midst of that light, I saw a figure that emanated majesty. He had eyes that seemed to contain entire galaxies, and his presence was so imposing that it made me want to kneel, although I didn't know how in that state. He spoke again, his voice reverberating through me like thunder. I'm Gabriel. I was sent to show you what is to come. The journey had begun. Gabriel extended his hand, and before I could even decide whether to touch it or not, I was enveloped by an even more intense light. In an instant, the environment around me changed. There was no longer peace in that space of living light. Now, I saw something totally different. The earth, but in a way I had never imagined. From where I was standing, it seemed like the entire world was covered in dense darkness. It was as if an invisible shadow, heavy and suffocating, had spread over all the continents. My heart sank. Even without being in my physical body, I felt something similar to sadness. "What is that?" I asked, my voice sounding clear despite the absolute silence around me. Gabriel looked at me, his eyes containing a mixture of compassion and seriousness. "These are the spiritual darkness that have dominated the world. It is the lack of faith, the distance from God, and the growth of hardened hearts." As he spoke, I saw small spots of light appearing in different parts of the earth. They were like lonely candles trying to illuminate a vast starless night. "And that?" I asked, feeling a twinge of hope when I saw the flashing lights. "These are the prayers and sincere worship of the faithful. Even in the midst of darkness, there are those who remain connected to the Creator. Your prayers are like beacons that repel the darkness." I was silent, watching those lights fight the shadows. Some were bright and constant, while others seemed to waver, almost going out. Gabriel pointed to a particularly bright light located in a small town. "Look, this is a church where worship is genuine and people live in communion with God." Then he showed me another place, where the light was dim and intermittent. "Here, many honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Their prayers are empty, their religious practices routine. They fell asleep spiritually." The pain in his voice was palpable. "Larkin, you need to understand that Earth is entering a critical period. Time is running out and many are not prepared." The images kept changing. I saw crowds running after something that seemed beautiful, but deep down was empty. I saw leaders preaching messages that pleased the ears, but did not transform hearts. And then I saw something that made my heart fill with hope. Children, young people, and even the elderly being used by God in extraordinary ways, their prayers creating waves of light that drove away the darkness. Gabriel turned to me, his expression grave. "You must take this message to the world, Larkin. They need to know what's coming. Time is short." Before I could respond or process what I had just seen, Gabriel reached out his hand again. I felt a wave of energy surrounding me, and, in the blink of an eye, the scenario changed once again. Now, we were in a vast, indescribable place where time seemed to not exist. It was as if space were a single eternal moment, without past or future, but still charged with purpose. In the center of this immense space, a colossal clock floated, but it was like no clock I had ever seen. Instead of numbers, each marker represented an event, and the hands moved with divine precision, guided by an invisible force. "What is that?" I asked, fascinated and scared at the same time. Gabriel looked at the clock and replied in his resonant voice, "This is the heavenly clock. It shows the events of the divine plan, which are happening and will happen. Every movement here reflects the advancement of God's purpose on earth." I approached the clock, hesitant, but drawn by curiosity. On one of the markers, I saw scenes of war and destruction. People fled in despair, while nations collapsed into conflict. In another marker, natural disasters devastated entire cities. Earthquakes, tsunamis, storms. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. "The world is already feeling the signs," Gabriel said, his expression as serious as before. The hands move faster and faster. "These events were predicted, but many are still blind to what is happening." He pointed to another marker on the clock, where I saw something different. This time, it was a spiritual movement. People were in fervent prayer, in homes, schools, and even on the streets. Children led prayer groups with impressive conviction, while elderly people who had previously seemed forgotten were now empowered and full of purpose. "The Holy Spirit is acting," Gabriel explained. "God is preparing his church for difficult times. He is strengthening the faithful, uniting hearts in prayer and awakening a new generation." But then Gabriel pointed to another spot on the clock, and what I saw filled me with apprehension. It was as if the entire earth was enveloped in a wave of deception. Beautiful, convincing words were being used to mask deep lies. Crowds followed leaders who preached what was pleasing to the ears, but which distanced them from divine truth. "The great deception approaches," Gabriel said, his voice full of urgency. "Many will succumb to it because they will not stand firm in the truth. Only those marked by the Holy Spirit will remain steadfast." I wanted to ask more, to understand better, but before I could speak, Gabriel took me to another vision. It was an almost military preparation, groups of believers being strengthened through trials. I saw tears, but I also saw courage. God is preparing his bride to endure and triumph, even in the midst of persecution. When the clock began to glow brightly, Gabriel turned to me. "Time is short, Larkin. There is no more room for complacency. You must alert the world. Preparation is urgent." Gabriel extended his hand once more, and the celestial clock disappeared. In its place, a new vision began to form. What I saw left me completely breathless. It was like watching a storm of light spreading across the entire planet. Small sparks of light appeared in different places, growing and coalescing into waves that moved like living fire. "This is the revival that is beginning to take shape," Gabriel explained, his voice filled with solemnity and hope. "Unlike anything that has ever happened on Earth, this one will be led by those the world least expects." I was confused. The ones the world least expects? What does that mean? Gabriel showed me more closely what was happening. I saw children gathered in groups, praying with fervor and intensity beyond their years. A girl of perhaps 8 was on her knees in a field, tears streaming down her face. She said, "Lord, send your light to save my father." All around him, a wave of light radiated from his prayer, and somewhere far away, I saw a man in a prison being touched by that same light. "Children will be raised up as pillars of faith," explained Gabriel. "Your prayers will have a direct impact on the spiritual world. God is awakening young people to lead with pure and unshakable faith." So I saw young people taking to the streets, but not with protests or disorder. They were preaching, singing, bringing hope to those around them. A boy, perhaps 17 years old, was with a guitar in a square, surrounded by dozens of people. He sang a song that seemed to come straight from his soul, and as he sang, tears rolled down the faces of those who listened. "The young people of this generation will be like torches in the darkness," Gabriel said, his expression firm. "They will be anchored in divine truth, refusing to give in to the world's deception." Then I saw elderly people, previously forgotten and isolated, gaining new strength. A gray-haired man stood in a small room, with an open Bible in front of him. He prayed aloud, and his prayer was so powerful that it seemed to shake the darkness around him. God is renewing the strength of the elderly, giving them purpose. Your prayers will have a direct impact on younger generations, and your words will carry wisdom and authority. But what touched me most was the vision of families being restored. Parents embraced once estranged children, spouses prayed together after years of emotional separation, and formerly warring siblings reconciled. This revival will not be contained within churches. It will happen in homes, schools, workplaces. It will be a fire that no one can put out. Gabriel turned to me, his face serious, but full of hope. "But remember, Larkin, revival will come with trials. It will be a battle, and many will need strength to resist. That's why God is raising up each of these groups, children, youth, seniors, and families, to fight the darkness with light, love, and truth." My heart seemed to explode with emotion and urgency upon hearing those words. Something inside me knew that I was being called to be part of this work in some way. The visions began to disappear, like a flame that slowly goes out, but Gabriel's presence remained intense and clear. He turned to me, his eyes containing a mixture of solemnity and urgency that made my heart, or whatever I was in that state, tremble. "Now, Larkin, you must go back." The idea of returning was confusing to me. The peace and fullness I felt in that space of light was so perfect that the simple notion of leaving it behind seemed impossible. To go back? But what if I don't make it? My body is... I saw it in the car, Gabriel. It's destroyed. He placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that wasn't physical, but I still felt the weight and comfort of it. "The Lord chose you for this mission. Fear not. You will return with the strength necessary to fulfill the purpose given to you." Before I could argue or even process his words, he added, "Remember what you saw. Share with the world. Prepare yourself and help others prepare. Time is short." Then I felt a tug, as if something was pulling me out of that space. The light began to fade, and with it, Gabriel's presence. A distant sound, voices, perhaps shouting, began to fill my ears. Suddenly, I was thrown back into my body. The impact was so strong that I almost felt as if I had fallen from a great height. The sound was now clear. "She's back. She's breathing." My eyes slowly opened, and the cold white light of the emergency room momentarily blinded me. A medical team stood around me, their expressions wavering between relief and astonishment. A doctor, with a stethoscope around his neck, approached me with an incredulous look. "Larkin Prescott, can you hear me?" I shook my head slightly, still confused and weak. My hands, which now felt heavy, tried to move, but they were stuck to tubes and monitors. "You were clinically dead for 13 minutes, he said, his voice thick with surprise. 13 minutes. We don't know how, but you came back, and, apparently, without any consequences." I couldn't speak, but inside me there was an indescribable peace. It all made sense in a way that words couldn't explain. Whatever had happened there, I knew it was no accident. As the doctors talked among themselves, I heard one of them, a tall woman in a lab coat, whisper, "This is a miracle." Yes, I thought it was a miracle, but not just a miracle of life. It was a calling, a purpose. I was back for a reason, and that was just the beginning. The first thing I felt, when I fully regained consciousness, was a crushing weight, not in my body, but in my soul. I knew what had happened. I knew what I had seen. Gabriel's words echoed in my mind. "Get ready. Share what you saw. Time is short." As the doctors continued to be impressed by my recovery, I sat silently, watching them with a clarity that seemed beyond me. "You are a rare exception, Larkin," said the cardiologist who treated me, Dr. Olivia Harper. 13 minutes clinically dead, and with no apparent brain or heart damage. It's as if nothing had happened. She spoke with the clinical enthusiasm of someone who completely trusted science, but something in her eyes said this was beyond explanation. I wanted to tell what had happened, but I felt that this was not the time. When I was released from the hospital, my son-in-law David came to pick me up. He was clearly worried, but relieved to see me walking and talking as if nothing had happened. "Mommy, you really scared all of us," Emma cried for hours. "I'm fine, David," I said, trying to reassure him. "But there's something I need to share, something important." He looked at me in the rearview mirror as he drove, his expression wary. "You can tell me when you're ready." For the next few days, I stayed at home, trying to process everything that had happened. My body was fine, but my mind was a whirlwind. I knew I needed to share the visions Gabriel showed me, but how, and for whom? The first step was to look for Pastor Gideon Blake, leader of the small church that I have attended sporadically over the last few years. He welcomed me with a warm smile, but when I started to tell him about my experience, I saw the smile slowly disappear. "Are you saying you went to heaven? Who found an angel named Gabriel?" he asked, crossing his arms, with an expression that wavered between curiosity and skepticism. "I know how it sounds, Pastor," I replied, my voice shaking. "But it's true. He showed me the spiritual condition of the world, what is to come, and the importance of preparing for Jesus' return. Darkness is spreading, but there is also hope." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Larkin, I believe you believe what you are saying, but experiences like this can be interpreted in many ways." I felt a tightness in my chest. "Pastor, I saw it. It was not an interpretation. God sent me back to warn people. What would you do if you knew time was running out and no one was ready?" There was a moment of silence before he sighed. "Let me pray about this. Maybe we can organize a small gathering at church for you to share your story." It was a start, but not enough. I knew I would need to face skepticism not just from strangers, but from my own family. When I told my daughter about my experience, she just shook her head, with a smile that mixed concern and disbelief. "Mom, you went through something traumatic. Don't you think that might have been imagination?" But Ethan, my 16-year-old grandson, listened to every word with wide-eyed amazement. "Grandma, have you seen the sky? Have you seen God?" "I saw a lot more than that, Ethan," I replied. "And you are also part of what is to come." He didn't ask what I meant, but his expression turned serious. Something had touched his heart. The mission had begun, and even without knowing how, I knew that God would open the way. In the days following my conversation with Pastor Gideon, I began to feel the real weight of my mission. Sharing the visions I saw was not just a leap of faith, it was a battle. The world seemed to have changed since I returned. Maybe not the world itself, but my perception of it. When I finally organized the small church gathering, I was nervous. It would only be a few people, regular members, who had known me for years, but even so, the fear of skepticism haunted me. While I waited, I sat on one of the benches asking God for strength. "Larkin," Ethan's voice broke me out of my thoughts. He was standing at the entrance to the sanctuary, holding a Bible that seemed too heavy for his hands. "Did you come?" I asked, surprised. "Of course. I need to hear again what you saw." And, if you need it, I will help you. My heart warmed. This was more than support. It was a sign that the revival Gabriel had mentioned was already beginning, albeit in a subtle way. When the church clock struck 7, Pastor Gideon stood up and called me to the altar. There were about 20 people present, familiar faces that varied between curiosity and skepticism. "Good evening, brothers," I began, my voice echoing through the small sanctuary. "I'm here because God sent me back. He showed me what's coming and what we need to do to prepare." I recounted my experience, from the moment of the heart attack to the visions of the heavenly clock and the revival. When I spoke about the great deception and the need for genuine prayer, I saw some whispering, but I also saw others listening with tears in their eyes. A woman named Sarah, who always sat in the back of the church, raised her hand. "Do you think this means God has given up on us? That we are doomed?" "No, Sarah," I replied firmly. "If he had given up, I wouldn't be here today. God is calling us back to him, showing us that there is still hope, but we need to act now." Ethan stood up unexpectedly and said, "My grandmother saw something that no one should ignore. I know many of you are in doubt, but if what she said is true, we need to come together. We can't continue living as if everything is fine." His words seemed to have an unexpected impact. An argument ensued, with some defending the urgency of the message and others questioning my sanity. After the meeting, Pastor Gideon took me aside. "You managed to touch some people today, Larkin, but there are those who need more time." I returned home exhausted, but there was something different that night. As I prayed, I felt a peace that could only come from God. The next day, I began visiting people individually, sharing my testimony on a more personal level. Sarah was first. When I knocked on her door, she seemed hesitant, but invited me in. "I don't know if I believe everything you said yesterday," she admitted, as she poured tea, "but something moved me. I haven't really prayed in years, Larkin. I don't even know how anymore." I held his hands firmly. "So let's learn together. Sincere prayer doesn't have to be perfect, Sarah. It just needs to come from the heart." As we prayed, something changed in the atmosphere. It was as if a new light had been turned on in that home. I knew the impact would be slow, but I also knew that each small step was part of God's plan. The following weeks were intense. What started as small church gatherings grew into home gatherings. Each person who heard my testimony seemed to be touched differently. Some, like Sarah, found the strength to resume a life of prayer. Others remained skeptical, but something always kept them coming back to hear more. Ethan became my greatest ally. Despite his youth, he seemed to understand the urgency of the message in a way that many adults could not. He started helping me organize meetings and even shared his own insights. "Do you think people don't believe because they are afraid, Grandma?" he asked one night, as we set up chairs in our living room for one of the meetings. I stopped for a moment, reflecting. Maybe, Ethan, fear can be a factor, but I think a lot of people don't want to change. Admitting that there is something wrong in the world, or in ourselves, takes courage. Not everyone is ready for that. The meetings began to attract more people, and with that came a new challenge: resistance. Not from strangers, but from people within the community itself. Some church members began to say that I was being overdramatic, or that I was trying to scare people with tall tales. One of these people was Margaret, a woman respected in the church and known for her dedication to community activities. During one of the meetings, she stood up, visibly uncomfortable. "Larkin, we respect you, but this all seems over the top. God has always been with us. We don't need an apocalyptic message to remind us of that." I took a deep breath, seeking the calm that Gabriel had taught me. "Margaret, I understand your concerns, but have you ever stopped to think why God would choose to send someone back with that message now? It's not because he wants to scare us, but because he loves us enough to prepare us." She didn't respond, but left early, shaking her head. After the meeting, Pastor Gideon looked for me. "You need to understand, Larkin, that some people are not ready to listen. Not everyone will accept your message right away." I knew he was right, but it still hurt. Despite this, I continued, focusing on the people who were open to listening. It was during one of these meetings that something unexpected happened. Dr. Olivia Harper showed up. She stood at the back of the room, watching as I spoke. I didn't know what to think. Why would a doctor, such a rational and skeptical woman, come to a meeting like that? After everyone left, she approached. "I still don't believe it all, Larkin," she said. blunt as ever. But something made me come here today. I have a patient who went through something similar. He told me about lights and about a divine presence. And do you think it's a coincidence that he and I have had similar experiences? I asked, smiling softly. I don't know what I think, she admitted, with a slight sigh, but I want to understand more. Olivia's arrival was a milestone. Her curiosity opened a new door, and, little by little, she began to listen and even question her own view of the world. Meanwhile, Ethan continued to grow in faith. He organized a small youth group, encouraging his friends to pray together. It was at that moment that I realized the revival that Gabriel had shown was truly beginning. As the meetings continued to grow, I realized my mission was not just to alert people to what was coming, but also to help them prepare. What Gabriel had shown me was not a message of condemnation, but of hope. The earth was in darkness, yes, but there were lights that could shine brighter. Ethan became a pillar in that movement. His youth group began to expand, with friends bringing other friends. He shared with me something one of his friends said: "If even a kid my age can pray and make a difference, what's to stop me from doing the same?" These words touched my heart deeply. I saw in the young people an enthusiasm and purity that recalled Gabriel's visions of children and young people being used by God in extraordinary ways. But with growth also came challenges. One night, while we were preparing for a meeting, I received an anonymous phone call. The voice was harsh and full of disdain. "Why do you insist on scaring people? This is not the work of God. It's fanaticism." That shook me. It was easy to ignore sporadic comments, but receiving a direct call brought a different weight. I shared what had happened with Ethan, and he, with his simple, courageous faith, responded, "Grandma, you can't stop. If what you're doing is bothering you, it's because it's working." That night, during the meeting, I talked about the importance of being prepared. Spiritual preparation does not mean living in fear, but with purpose. God has not called us to be spectators, but participants in His plan. Each sincere prayer is a candle lit in the midst of darkness, and many candles together can light up the world. I saw emotional faces, tears in some eyes. Even Margaret, who had previously resisted my message, began attending meetings again, always in silence, but with a more receptive face. One of the biggest surprises came from Sarah, the woman who previously didn't know how to pray. During one of the meetings, she shared her testimony. I didn't believe what Larkin was saying, but I decided to give it a try. I started to pray, even though I didn't know what to say, and something changed in my house. My husband, who hadn't been inside a church in years, started asking about God. This cannot be a coincidence. The stories began to multiply. People reported changes in their lives, reconciliations in their families, a peace they had never experienced before. Dr. Olivia Harper also started attending meetings regularly. Although still skeptical, she asked questions and listened intently. One night, after a particularly touching encounter, she approached me. "You know, I still don't believe all of this," he began, with a steady gaze. "But something is happening. I see it in people, and I feel it, maybe even in myself. I don't know how to explain it." I thanked her for being open. "You don't have to believe it right away, Olivia. Just keep searching. God always finds those who seek Him." As the weeks passed, he felt the weight of Gabriel's words with even more urgency. I knew time was short, but I also knew that God was acting. With each meeting, each prayer, each heart touched, the light seemed to grow. At one of the last meetings of the year, as I looked at the full room, young people, old people, entire families, I was overcome by an overwhelming emotion. I stood up and said, "You are proof that God has not given up on us. You are the lights that drive away the darkness. Never forget that." The silence was broken by a unison, "Amen." At that moment, I realized that my mission was just beginning. I didn't know how much time I had left, but I knew that each day, each person reached, was part of God's greater plan. Get ready. Stay close to Jesus. Time is short. These words echoed in my soul every dawn. And so, I continued, with renewed hope and purpose. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.